Hey there, ready to slip quietly into the shadowy corridors of ancient Egypt, where bedtime stories are less about counting sheep and more about counting your royal enemies. Tonight, I'm taking you inside the golden but suffocating cradle of a young pharaoh, a life where your first toy is a ceremonial scepter, your first friend is your mother's anxious advisor, and your first big secret is that you're not really sure you want to run the universe before you can tie your sandals. Stick around, because by the end of this chapter, you'll find out which royal relative is most likely to become your spouse. And trust me, you're not going to see that family twist coming. If stories like this make your eyelids heavy and your curiosity sharp, go ahead and like and subscribe, but only if you're actually enjoying yourself here. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time you've tuned in. I love seeing this odd worldwide bedtime gathering. Now, dim the lights, settle in. Maybe wrap yourself in something soft that doesn't itch like ceremonial linen, and let's drift into the strange, lonely world behind the Pharaoh's famous gold mask. So here's where your story begins. You're not just born, you're unveiled. The instant you let out your royal wail, you're not met with coos and cuddles. Instead, you're swaddled in linen, so starched it could stand by itself, presented to a room full of men in eyeliner, and evaluated for omens like a prize-winning calf at a supernatural county fair. Forget rattles and lullabies. You get a chorus of priests chanting in a language you don't understand, their breath thick with frankincense and the unmistakable aroma of existential dread. Someone already has a chisel in hand, etching your name into a monument you'll never see, while your mother's midwife tries to remember if a cow mooed at sunrise. Every adult in the room is sweating, but not because the palace is hot. They're terrified of what happens if the living godling in their arms gets a cold. You're not just a child. No, you're a celestial event wrapped in a leaky bundle. If your tiny hand so much as twitches, a priest somewhere starts calculating the odds of famine. If you sneeze, the astrologer calls for extra incense and starts muttering about cosmic disorder. Childhood? You don't get one. While ordinary babies gnaw on wooden ducks and drool all over their bibs, you're handed a scepter so ornate that if you tried to teethe on it, you'd probably chip a tooth and cause a minor diplomatic incident. Your crib is a gold-plated box that radiates prestige and drafts at the same time. Think less cozy nursery, more luxury mausoleum for someone who can't sit up yet. Your lullabies are replaced by hymns so ancient, even the priests have to check their notes. The singers are men with shaved heads and sad eyes, their voices echoing through marble halls, forever reminding you that sleep is a privilege reserved for commoners and cats. Your caretakers hover like anxious herons, their only job to make sure you neither die nor do anything undignified, which, to be fair, is most of what infants do. Every burp is a political statement. Every nap is a risk assessed by no fewer than 3 astrologers and a backup scribe. From the start, you're bottle-fed anxiety. Every feeding is an event. Every visitor a possible spy. Every cousin a potential rival. You don't get to babble freely. Your first words are rehearsed, blessed, and possibly ghost-written by the high priest. If you try to crawl toward anyone under the age of 10, someone whispers, "That's the general's daughter. Best not let her near the sacred infant." Even your playdates are pre-screened by palace security, who keep a suspicious eye on anyone with a family tree that forks too close to yours. While you're still figuring out how to clap, your tutors are already drawing up your syllabus. Reading and writing? Not just letters, but hieroglyphs, tiny birds, snakes, and mysterious squiggles that can either launch a new tax or accidentally curse a neighbor's goat for eternity. Every lesson is a potential headline in the next palace scandal. And don't even think about doodling. One wrong squiggle on your homework, and the next thing you know, someone's being exiled for blasphemy. Your education is relentless. You rise before dawn, roused not by a gentle nurse, but by the chief steward, who recites your schedule like it's a royal edict. There's no time for cartoons, or even for staring at the ceiling and imagining a life where you're not responsible for the Nile's annual flooding. You're drilled in religious lore, how to pronounce the hidden names of the gods, how to wave incense in exactly the right way, so the universe doesn't tip over, and how to bless a cucumber without looking ridiculous. The priests watch you like hawks, ready to frown if you blink at the wrong moment or sneeze during an offering. Math isn't about adding up your allowance. It's geometry for monument building, because one day someone's going to ask you to design a pyramid, and you'd better not end up with something that leans like a tipsy camel. Your mistakes aren't just embarrassing, they're potentially catastrophic. The phrase measure twice, cut once, takes on new meaning when the afterlife of half your ancestors depends on your sense of angles. Public speaking is drilled into you while you're still young enough to trip over your own feet. No pressure. You're only expected to address crowds who think you literally command the sun. Flub a line, and suddenly the price of barley collapses. Say something too poetic, and half the court starts reading omens into your breakfast menu. Then comes military training. You're 10 years old, barely strong enough to lift a ceremonial sword. But that doesn't stop the generals from teaching you how to smite the Nubians, as if it's just another after-school activity. You're learning battlefield formations before you've figured out the difference between a javelin and a breadstick. And don't forget, every game of mock battle is watched by people whose job security depends on you not getting stabbed, even accidentally. Philosophy? Not really. You get lectures on Ma'at, the sacred balance of the cosmos, a poetic way to say, if the weather is bad, it's probably your fault. You're taught that every little thing you do, from the way you sit in a chair to how you hold a lotus blossom, has cosmic significance. There's no room for doubt, only performance. You're the living standard for order, and if you dare to daydream, someone's taking notes for your next performance review. Every tutor is equal parts teacher, informant, and snitch. They report your every word. If you're curious, excellent. If you're rebellious, concerning. If you ask whether your cousin could stop staring at you during lunch, that's definitely going in the Daily Scroll. Privacy doesn't exist. You can't disappear for even a minute. Someone will raise the alarm, and the palace guard will begin a full-scale search for the missing deity. You're divine, after all, and the gods aren't supposed to wander off unsupervised. Your social life is a minefield. Most kids pick friends based on who shares their sweets or lets them cheat at board games. You? Everyone you meet is a walking political calculation. The kid who always races you in the garden is the high priest's only son. The one who never loses at Senate is the vizier's nephew. The girl you actually want to talk to? already promised to someone else to cement an alliance. You're not making friends, you're networking for your life. Even your tutors play both sides. Show too much independence, and you're labeled a threat. Question a ritual, and you're suspected of heresy. Show favoritism, and suddenly the court is awash in rumors that you've chosen your future queen at the tender age of 9. You quickly learn to become a master of neutrality, smiling politely, complimenting tunics you hate, and never, ever letting anyone get too close. This isn't a childhood. It's a never-ending press conference where every question is a trap, and every answer could spark a palace coup. So you grow up guarded, learning to laugh without meaning it, to nod at jokes that make your skin crawl, and to compliment your cousin's elaborate hairdo, while secretly hoping she moves to Thebes. In the royal world, no new friends isn't a catchy slogan. It's a survival tactic. Because even the friendliest face might grow up to challenge you for the throne, poison your wine, or worse, become your brother-in-law. The deeper into adolescence you go, the heavier the crown feels. You are officially divine, not in the everyone thinks you're special sense, but in the actual living God on earth sense. The priests say it, the scrolls confirm it, and the people bow so low you'd think you invented the Nile. But no one asks if you're ready for that kind of pressure. Every minor mishap, a stubbed toe, a case of acne, an upset stomach from too many figs, becomes a matter for the court astrologer. The contradiction is everywhere. You're meant to be infallible, but you're still a teenager with all the awkwardness and insecurities that come with it. Your every breath is ceremonial. Your every step is ritualized. You can't even eat breakfast without a priest blessing your bread and a scribe recording your choice of jam for historical posterity. Any mistake must be explained away as a sign from the gods, which leads to some truly creative excuses for why you tripped over your own sandals in the temple. Despite your supposed omnipotence, you can't leave the palace without an entourage of guards, priests, and officials, all watching you as if you might spontaneously combust. You're told you control the Nile floods, but if you so much as sneeze, someone's already preparing a sacrifice to appease the gods. You're responsible for Ma'at, for order, for the crops, the people, and the weather, a cosmic to-do list that grows longer every day. And then, just when you think puberty can't get any worse, your court advisors sweep in with beaming smiles and an ominous scroll. It's time to choose a wife, preferably your sister. Yes, you heard that right. For the sake of divine legitimacy, you are now expected to marry a close relative, your half-sister, your aunt, your cousin. The palace is abuzz with speculation, servants placing bets on which branch of the family tree will get pruned next. Romance doesn't even enter the equation. Your feelings are irrelevant. The only thing that matters is keeping the bloodline pure and the gods happy, a combination that, historically, has resulted in some very complicated family reunions. The priests are delighted, the courtiers are nervous, and you're left trying to pretend this is fine. Your entire adolescence is now a high-stakes game of which relative is least related, and how quickly can we produce an heir. There's no time to get used to the idea. You're barely past your first chin hair, and already the pressure is on to provide Egypt with its next living god. The entire realm is waiting. Your hormones are confused, and your only real comfort is that everyone else looks just as uncomfortable as you feel. Nothing says divine legitimacy like holding hands at your wedding with someone who also shared your childhood nurse. Meanwhile, the palace becomes a theater of nervous whispers. Court officials argue over genetic proximity as if it's a riddle from Ra himself. The servants gossip in hallways. You try to keep a straight face, attending banquets, sitting through endless ceremonies, and pretending that marrying your niece is just another part of the divine plan. But it's not just about marriage. It's about heirs, lots of them, and quickly. You're supposed to remain calm, composed, and ceremonial, even as your private doubts grow louder. You're not just a husband now. You're a symbol of fertility, order, and cosmic power. And every ritual you attend with your new bride, who, for the record, might also be your cousin, is a reminder of just how little control you have over your own life. In the rare moments you're alone, you might feel disgust, confusion, or simply the urge to run into the desert and yell at the sky. But you can't show any of that. Expressing doubt is the fastest way to find yourself replaced by a more enthusiastic sibling. So you smile, you wave, you bless statues, and you convince yourself that it's all for the good of Egypt. Because what's a little inbreeding compared to the fate of an empire? This is the royal adolescence, sponsored by politics, genetics, and a healthy dose of denial. Every day you perform perfection, even when you'd rather just eat a pomegranate in peace. The higher you climb on the pyramid of divine expectation, the lonelier it gets, and nobody warned you about that. And so, after years of divine performance, ceremonial marriage, and awkward adolescence, you finally reach the moment the world has been waiting for. The crown is ready. The rituals await. You're about to become the Pharaoh in full, with all the burdens, rituals, and dangers that come with the job. But trust me, the real fun and the real risks are only just beginning. The priests have chanted, the crowds have cheered, and the crown has been jammed onto your skull with all the grace of a blacksmith fitting a shoe. You're Pharaoh now, living God, king of the two lands, divine CEO of a civilization powered by bread and paranoid bureaucracy. You might expect your first day on the job to be all glory and gold. But let's be honest, it's more like a never-ending episode of Survivor, except everyone is in linen, and the immunity idol is an actual idol. Let's start with your new look. The transformation from mere mortal to Pharaoh is not exactly subtle. First, a pair of priests, whose job titles are probably beard attacher and symbolic cobra wrangler, appear with a pot of beeswax. Before you can protest, they smear a generous goop of it on your chin and press a fake beard into place. It's stiff, itchy, and, despite what the propaganda says, it does not make you look wise. It makes you look like you lost a bet with a beehive. Then, there's the cobra. Yes, a golden one. But that doesn't make it any less ridiculous, strapped right to your forehead. It's supposed to ward off evil, but really, it's just a heavy reminder that everyone's watching to see if you flinch. Now, let's talk about the crown. Not just any crown, the double crown. Imagine balancing a motorcycle helmet made of leather, linen, and actual metal, plus a second helmet stacked on top, and then add a potted plant for good measure. That's about the sensation you get when the double crown is lowered onto your head. It's not just heavy, it's an existential weight, both literally and symbolically. If you happen to wince, tough luck. Your posture is now a matter of national security. Slump, and somewhere a priest gasps, convinced the universe is wobbling. Of course, no ruler's ready without the full ceremonial outfit. Let's see. There's the white linen kilt, freshly starched to the point of cardboard. Over that, a sash of leopard skin, which is less regal hunter and more draped in something that smells suspiciously musky. Gold breastplates are added for effect, but here's the thing. Gold doesn't breathe. You're sweating like a mortal, but you're supposed to look immortal. And don't forget the sandals, papyrus flip-flops that offer as much support as a wet noodle. Each step is a reminder that fashion has always been the enemy of circulation. But none of this is optional. Comfort is for peasants. You are a symbol now, a walking billboard for divinity and cosmic harmony. Every color you wear, every feather sticking out of your headdress, every embroidery choice, these are all loaded with meaning. Wear the wrong shade of blue, and suddenly, somewhere, a scribe is writing a report on how you've offended Amun. Trip on your hem, and next week's famine is blamed on your clumsy footwork. There's no such thing as a wardrobe malfunction. There are only portents of doom. No pressure. Still, you must glide through it all, as if you were sculpted from the finest granite, while your back spasms under the weight of 30 pounds of symbolism. The throne may be gold, but it's about as comfortable as sitting on a stack of bricks. And everyone's watching to see if you squirm. But the true burden of Pharaoh isn't just the wardrobe, or the rituals, or even the threat of a wardrobe-based apocalypse. It's the expectation, the sense that you, and only you, hold the threads of the universe together. You are worshipped as a living god, yes. But the moment the Nile floods too much, or doesn't flood enough, or a goat gets a cold, the blame falls squarely on your divine shoulders. Too much rain. Clearly, Pharaoh is emotionally unstable. Not enough rain? The gods are displeased with Pharaoh. Crops fail. Pharaoh must have skipped a ritual or sneezed in the wrong direction. You're not just the king. You're the kingdom's cosmic lightning rod. If the sun rises late, nobody assumes it's just clouds. No. Clearly, you forgot to chant something important. If you have a headache, that's a national crisis. If you oversleep, scribes are already drafting a scroll titled "The Day the World Almost Ended," because Pharaoh hit snooze. And if you happen to sneeze during a ritual, someone somewhere is sacrificing a goat, just in case your sinuses have apocalyptic implications. Even your dreams aren't safe. If you toss and turn at night, within hours the royal astrologers are gathered, muttering about portents and bad omens. They'll probably recommend building a new temple, just to be sure. Got a paper cut? That's a sign from the gods. Drop your cup of wine? Expect a week of ceremonial apologies to Osiris. Your entire existence is basically a cosmic customer service line for the universe's most superstitious clientele. And because you're divine, you can never admit you don't know what you're doing. Why are the frogs invading Pharaoh? You can't say, "I have no idea." Instead, you nod wisely and invent a new ritual on the spot. Something involving incense, a duck, and a moonlit chant. The priests nod approvingly, scribes take notes, and your people sleep a little easier, blissfully unaware that you just made up half your job requirements over breakfast. Let's talk about your morning routine. Forget the idea of a gentle start to your day. There's no coffee, no lounging in bed. You're woken up by a chorus of priests singing in a key best described as enthusiastic but off-putting. Incense fills the room, making your eyes water before you've even opened them. Next, you're led to a sacred pool for ritual purification. The water is always freezing, apparently. Lukewarm water offends the gods. By the time you've dried off, you're shivering, awake, and already regretting your career choices. Then comes the wardrobe. Not just any linen, the special linen, pre-blessed, triple-folded, and possibly ironed by moonlight. You're barely awake, but soon you're encased in layers of fabric and armor, with a falcon-shaped chest plate pressing into your ribs. You haven't even started work, and you're already overheating. Now, the rituals begin. You shuffle into the temple, trailing a small army of priests and attendants. The high priest unrolls a scroll so long it could double as a riverbank. You're expected to move through a complex series of gestures, hand here, nod there, stare meaningfully at a statue, recite the name of a god you haven't thought about since you were 12. The sequence is so complicated, you're convinced someone once made it up as a prank. Miss a gesture, mangle a chant, or yawn at the wrong moment, and suddenly you're the reason the Nile is running low. There's a running joke among the priests. If Pharaoh sneezes, we all get a day off to build a new shrine. The ceremonies stretch on for hours, and you're forbidden from showing any sign of boredom. No yawning, no slouching, not even a discreet itch. Occasionally, you catch yourself wondering if anyone would notice if you scratched your nose with the sacred scepter. The answer, of course, is yes. Someone is always watching. The priests, the scribes, the onlookers, they're all keeping score. This isn't just religion, it's national theatre, with you as the star performer in an endless production of cosmic maintenance. And just when you think you've survived the morning, you realize you haven't done anything remotely like ruling the kingdom. All this, and it's not even noon. Your day is dictated by rituals, omens, and a checklist so long it makes tax forms look like a shopping list. The sun is barely up, and you're already exhausted, with another 12 rituals, 3 public appearances, and a carefully rehearsed divine smile still to go. But the real danger isn't the rituals, or the heat, or the risk of divine embarrassment. It's the people around you. Everyone is smiling, bowing, and pretending to adore you, but you know better. Your guards are loyal until someone offers them more gold or a better afterlife package. Your advisors are always eager to help, but somehow keep mentioning how popular your cousin is with the army. Even your cupbearer is suspiciously attentive, as if he wants you to really notice how not poisoned your drink is today. Your extended family, a royal soap opera, starring half-brothers, uncles, and at least 3 people named Ramses, who give you the side-eye at dinner. These aren't relatives. They're future applicants for your job. Every hallway chat could turn into a recruitment interview for your replacement. Every banquet feels like it might be your last. You try to relax, but even the decorative cobra on your throne seems to be eyeing you with suspicion. This is not paranoia, it's self-preservation. Palace assassinations are almost a tradition. If you die suddenly, people whisper that it was the will of the gods. In reality, someone probably got creative with a basket of dates and a handful of scorpion tails. You develop habits, food tasters, rotating servants, changing your daily route, triple-checking the locks. Not because it really protects you, but because it keeps everyone guessing. And sleep? Forget it. Your bedchamber is a fortress, triple-barred doors, a ceremonial dagger under the pillow, and a guard outside practicing his best innocent face. You try to rest, but every creak sounds like a plot, and every shadow could be an uncle with ambition issues. Yet, the hardest part isn't just surviving. It's pretending none of this bothers you. You must glide through the palace looking serene and divine, never letting on that you know your cupbearer is probably keeping score. Fear is weakness, and weakness is an invitation. Every glance, every handshake, every polite compliment could be someone's attempt to edge closer to your throne. If you ever trust the wrong person, you won't have to worry about tomorrow's rituals. Someone else will be wearing your beard and crown. So yes, you're the most powerful person in Egypt, but your true job is to survive a palace full of people who bow during the day and sharpen knives at night. The ancient world loved its gods, but it loved a good power struggle even more. And all of this, every burden, ritual, and lurking danger, plays out before you even step outside, where the real performance begins. Because, as Pharaoh, you were expected to be many things. Let's be clear. When you wake up as Pharaoh, you don't just roll out of bed and walk into a casual day at the office. You rise, if you can call it that, already imprisoned in a role that demands you be divine, flawless, radiant, and apparently immune to sweat stains and existential dread all at once. People expect you to glide through public life like an immortal Instagram filter. Never mind the fact that you're wearing a gold-plated breastplate in heat that would make a crocodile consider air conditioning. Egyptian public life is just one relentless, never-ending spectacle. Your mornings begin with the sound of trumpets and the heavy shuffle of priests, courtiers, and officials, all waiting for you to emerge, perfectly composed. You're expected to step out onto the palace balcony and bless your adoring crowds. But really, you're just squinting into the blinding sun, wondering if anyone will notice the eye makeup melting down your cheeks like a tragic clown god. The processions. Oh, the processions. You ride in a chariot that looks impressive from a distance, but up close, it's a glorified wooden box on wheels, painted gold, but about as comfortable as a rolling bookshelf. The crowds pack the streets, waving palm fronds, tossing petals and screaming your name. Some are genuinely in awe. Others are just here for the free bread distributed by officials trying to keep things festive and the stomachs full, and, ideally, the riots to a minimum. You wave, you smile, you radiate divine approval. Inside, your knees are shaking, and your ceremonial sandals are making that special squelching sound you get when linen and humidity team up to wage war on your dignity. Every eye in the crowd is locked on you, searching for any sign of weakness or, worse, humanity. If you so much as yawn or scratch your nose, you'll hear about it for weeks. Did you see the Pharaoh? He's exhausted. The gods must be angry. The river will dry up. Cats will rule the earth. That last one is actually a standard rumor, and the cats seem fine with it. Your daily rituals are the original endurance challenge. Hours spent standing perfectly still as priests chant, nobles bow, and you bestow the sacred blessing upon, wait for it, a cow. Not even a glamorous bull, just a cow with a garland around its neck, looking as unimpressed as you feel. You slice ceremonial ribbons with a gold knife, accept offerings you would never dare eat, and nod at nobles who would stab you for your seat if the opportunity presented itself. May the gods bless you, you say, while your inner voice mutters, may the gods grant me a nap. The sun is your constant, merciless companion. It's supposed to be your symbol, Ra's chosen child, the living embodiment of solar power. In reality, the sun is more like a celestial HR manager, clocking every moment you falter. Your headdress, a dazzling symbol of authority, doubles as a personal sauna. The gold jewelry heats up until you're convinced you could scramble eggs on your collarbone. Even your linen robes betray you, sticking to every inch of skin not already chafed by the ceremonial scepter you have to hold. You are a god, yes, but a god who sweats. And don't forget the makeup, thick black coal smudged around your eyes, meant to protect you from evil spirits and the sun's glare. Mostly, it runs into your eyes, stinging so badly you start to wonder if the evil spirits have a point. The incense, meant to purify the air, instead clogs it. By the time you're halfway through the morning's rituals, you're gasping for breath and praying, ironically, for a breeze. Every action, every gesture is loaded with meaning. If you stumble, if you look irritated, or if you skip out on a single goose blessing, the rumors start. Pharaoh is displeased. Pharaoh is weak. The heavens are in turmoil. Miss one festival, and you wake up to find the entire city whispering that the Nile might not rise this year, all because you had a headache and didn't feel like watching another interpretive dance about the birth of the cosmos. Festivals, which, in theory, should be fun, are just more public performance. You attend banquets so lavish they'd make a Vegas buffet blush, but you're not allowed to eat half the food. You sit through dances where the only thing you move is your forced smile. Religious plays are staged in your honor, and you, the Pharaoh, get to play yourself, silent, stoic, and entirely upstaged by actors in jackal masks. By the end of the day, you limp back to the palace, drenched in sweat and the faint aroma of burnt myrrh, wondering how many more statues you'll have to bless before someone invents the concept of sleep. The public expects to see a living god, not a glorified scarecrow, desperately wishing for a cold drink and a quiet room. But here's the real twist. Behind all this spectacle, behind the chariots, the parades, the dazzling regalia, there's a shadow government running the show. The priests. Temples in Egypt aren't just places for prayer. They're the original multi-purpose facilities. Think of them as banks, farms, schools, and tax offices rolled into one, all powered by incense and the promise of eternal life or eternal paperwork. The priesthood is a league of political masterminds in linen robes. They control grain, land, gold, and the all-important public opinion. They handle the festivals, the omens, and, more crucially, your reputation. If you sneeze during a ceremony, they'll interpret it as a sign from the heavens. If you wear the wrong colored sash, That's enough to spark an existential crisis in the barley markets. You work with them, or you don't work at all. Without the priests, your divine status is about as stable as a papyrus boat in crocodile season. All it takes is one new prophecy etched into a temple wall, and suddenly the gods have chosen your cousin, who's been eyeing your throne since kindergarten. The temples are tax-exempt, of course. Their wealth is untouchable. Their golden statues of jackals have better retirement packages than your generals, and their libraries are full of records about every embarrassing thing you've ever done. The worst part? The priests insist they live only to serve your divine will. They bow, they chant, they shower you with flattery, all while quietly redirecting resources, managing palace spies, and advising your enemies to try their luck with a little treason on the side. You're the living God, but they're the ones measuring how holy you're allowed to be this week. Defy them, and the nation rebels. Obey them, and you become the world's most gilded mascot. It's a perpetual tug of war, with incense smoke and passive-aggressive prayers filling the air. The longer you rule, the clearer it becomes. The gods may dwell above, but their accountants definitely live down the hall, and they always get the last word. And as you collapse onto your gilded couch, head spinning from politics, parades, and the world's most uncomfortable headdress, you might start to wonder, with all these power games and public performances, what's going on back at home? After all, palace drama is never far behind, especially when your own family is involved. In most families, drama means someone forgot a birthday or made a snide comment at dinner. Let's be honest, while most families argue over who gets the last piece of cake, in yours, family drama means plotting poisonings over breakfast and the occasional, "Oops, did someone just fall into the crocodile pit again?" Because here, in the palace, you don't just fear foreign invaders. The real enemy is your own DNA. Welcome to the Royal House of Snakes, where every cousin, half-brother, and uncomfortably ambitious aunt eyes your throne like it's the last seat on a lifeboat. You grew up surrounded by relatives who should have come with warning labels. Forget sibling rivalry. Your siblings kept score in attempted coups. Uncles, half-uncles, and even that beloved cousin twice removed, all of them are one awkward banquet away from sending you on a permanent vacation to the afterlife. Ambition runs in the bloodline, sure, but so does a disturbing fondness for suspiciously slippery staircases. Let's talk succession. You might imagine some orderly process, maybe a golden envelope with the words, "Congratulations, you're Pharaoh." Nope. Egypt's rules for picking the next king are the historical equivalent of musical chairs mixed with a knife fight. There's no eldest son gets it all. It's more like whoever survives the most assassination attempts and collects enough priestly endorsements gets to wear the crown. The priests love this, of course. It keeps them well-fed, well-bribed, and always positioned to back whichever horse looks most likely to trample the others. Your own children are less a loving brood and more a collection of rival sports teams, each with a roster of tutors, spies, and mothers running their own PR campaigns. Bedtime stories in this palace are less about fairy tales and more about the gods always choosing the most dazzling, clever, or conveniently located heir. Nothing says family values like your mother whispering that you're the chosen one, right after she's paid 3 scribes to rewrite the family tree. And the queens. Yes, plural. You have multiple wives, and, as if that weren't complicated enough, they all live under one roof, developing alliances and rivalries with the precision of chess grandmasters. One glance in the wrong direction, and suddenly your favorite wine is being sampled by 3 different food tasters before it lands on your table. You're not running a household. You're running an ongoing reality show where the elimination round could be fatal. Your daily life is a bizarre blend of luxury and paranoia. On the outside, it's dazzling. Gold everywhere, perfumed halls, every meal a feast. But inside, you know you're living in a gold-plated cage, a cage filled with relatives who'd love to retire you, preferably in a decorative sarcophagus. And speaking of sarcophagi, let's discuss funerals. In most families, a death is a time for mourning and maybe a polite argument about the will. For you, every death is a potential crime scene. Every fever a suspected poisoning. Every sniffle a topic of breathless temple gossip. Even your own burial is just another round of palace intrigue. Tombs get looted, names are erased, and your loving children squabble over who gets to build the biggest pyramid. The only thing more common than gold-leafed coffins is the urge to quietly edit your legacy before the paint is even dry. It's a bitter truth. The people who know you best are also the ones most likely to arrange for your retirement with as much subtlety as a sandstorm. You spend your life navigating a family tree that's less a network and more a well-armed thicket. Every smile hides a calculation. Every toast could be your last. It's like living in a royal version of Survivor, except the tribal council is armed with daggers and divine mandates. So let's say you finally succumb, whether from poison, accident, or just the sheer exhaustion of pretending to enjoy family dinners. You'd hope for some peace, right? Not in Egypt. Dying is just your cue to become a full-time spiritual icon and, occasionally, a horror movie extra. The embalming team arrives before your body even cools. First, they remove your organs, each one carefully weighed and stuffed into its own canopic jar, guarded by animal-headed deities who look suspiciously like a supernatural action figure lineup. And then there's your brain. Out it comes, yanked through your nose with a hooked stick. Not for any medical reason, just because that's the way we've always done it. The rest of you is packed with resin-drenched linen and natron salts until you resemble a sacred raisin rolled in bandages and anxiety. Your body is now less a person, more a royal artifact, prepped for a very long display. Now comes the nesting doll routine. You get tucked into a series of coffins, each one fancier than the last, until you're basically a divine babushka. Gold leaf spells for ghostly protection and inscriptions promising eternal bliss. Assuming, of course, you don't run into any particularly rude spirits on the way to the afterlife. But the real centerpiece, your tomb. You spent half your reign and most of Egypt's GDP on a mausoleum that's supposed to scream immortality. The walls are covered with prayers, instructions for the afterlife, and awkwardly heroic drawings of yourself smiting enemies who, let's be honest, are probably more interested in looting your burial chamber than dueling your shade. Here's the catch. Your tomb doesn't just say eternity. It also says, steal me. Despite curses, booby traps, and guards who swear they're alert, most royal tombs are plundered within a few generations, sometimes within the week. While priests chant prayers and light incense, local criminals are already making off with your gold-plated sandals and the world's fanciest footstool. And the afterlife? You'd think you'd finally be in control. Not so fast. If your name gets scratched out, if the tomb's defaced, or if your mummy winds up in a museum under fluorescent lights, you're out of luck. Ancient Egyptian bureaucracy is even more unforgiving than palace politics. If nobody remembers your name, your soul doesn't make it to paradise. You're just another lost ghost, doomed to haunt the archaeologist who accidentally dropped your canopic jar. You might have been king in life, but in death, you're just another collectible, museum bait, political bargaining chip, or that mummified cautionary tale in some dusty travel guide. And you haven't even made it to the Hall of Judgment yet. For a guy advertised as the living embodiment of the sun, you sure spend a lot of time in the dark, both literally and metaphorically. And it's not just death that's loaded with drama. Being Pharaoh means you're expected to lead armies personally, not from the comfort of a distant tent, but right there at the front, war chariot and all, swinging a ceremonial axe and shouting divine slogans. Your generals handle the tactics. The scribes spin the stories. But you're the face of the operation, desperately trying to look brave while hoping your helmet doesn't slip and expose just how much sleep you've lost. And don't even think about losing. Pharaohs don't lose. If you trip, get injured, or, Ra forbid, retreat, the priests will say, the gods have turned their backs on you. That's all the excuse your rivals need to start measuring for your sarcophagus. Maybe you'll get a pyramid. More likely, you'll get quietly replaced by someone with better luck and a better PR team. So you're trapped in this exhausting cycle. Raise taxes to fund a war. Fight the war to look like a hero. Then build a monument to exaggerate your heroism, just in case anyone remembers you. Nearly got skewered. It's expensive, nerve-wracking, and terrible for your digestion. By the time you've finished your reign, you're less a living god and more a cautionary tale with a very sore back. And here's the final, deliciously cruel twist. After all the temple building, the statue posing, and the endless rituals, your legacy isn't even yours. You can spend decades chiseling your name into everything from obelisks to toilet seats. All it takes is one jealous successor with a chisel, and suddenly it's like you were never born. Name erased, statues beheaded, achievements reassigned to your great-nephew, who lasted 6 months and declared himself son of the sun, and also extremely handsome. In Egypt, erasing someone's name isn't just petty, it's spiritual murder. If no one speaks your name, you don't get into the afterlife. You're not just forgotten, you're imprisoned in cosmic limbo, all because your great-grandson wanted to reallocate your pyramid budget. And if they don't erase you, they might just rewrite you. Your embarrassing defeats become glorious victories. Your mild-mannered persona is now ferocious champion of Ra. That unfortunate crocodile incident magically disappears from the record. Future generations treat your legacy like a group project they didn't bother to read. You're remembered not for who you were, but for whatever makes the next guy look like a genius. And sometimes the real insult comes thousands of years later, when your carefully hidden tomb is cracked open by sunburned archaeologists. Your mummy gets shipped off for display. Your gold coffin winds up in a museum, and some poor intern catalogues your toenail clippings for a travelling exhibit. So there you are, once the lord of the two lands, now a dehydrated skeleton in a climate-controlled box, while tourists mispronounce your name and wonder if your curse includes food poisoning. You ruled an empire, lived as a god, and now you're the star attraction for field trips and souvenir keychains. Immortality, it turns out, is just another word for permanently on loan. That's dynastic immortality for you. You spend your life dodging relatives, building monuments, and performing rituals, only to end up as an awkward footnote in someone else's bedtime story. You are the chosen of Ra, the living god, the ultimate status symbol. And your greatest legacy is being slightly misquoted by a travel blogger 3 millennia later. But don't worry, you're not alone in this. Across the sands and centuries, other rulers are facing their own brand of divine chaos. Next, we'll leave the incense-soaked halls of Egypt behind and travel north, where the air is colder, the axes sharper, and the royal drama even bloodier. Because while your family feuds were deadly, Vikings could start with an axe to the skull and end with exile. Harald Sigurdsson entered the world in the year 1015, screaming, we assume, into a kingdom already on fire. You're born in 1015, not gently or serenely, but, let's be honest, probably howling your head off, as if you already sense what's waiting for you outside those swaddling linens. Norway isn't some peaceful fairy tale kingdom. It's a battlefield. Your half-brother, Olaf Haraldsson, is out there, swinging axes and making speeches, trying to glue together a country that would rather gnaw off its own arm than listen to another royal decree. Half the nobles want Olaf's head. The Danes are just waiting for any excuse to invade, and the old pagan gods are being elbowed aside by a new, ever so holy Christian regime. So, congratulations. You're not born into comfort. You're born into chaos. Every cradle in your palace might as well be lined with arrowheads and political pamphlets. Your family isn't one of those simple, salt-of-the-earth clans either. Your father, Sigurdsson, is a king, technically, but really he's a glorified farmer who just happens to have more silver than the neighbors and a bit more land. He's respected, sure, but nobody's writing epic poetry about the man's haystacks. Your mother, Astagud Brandsdatter, now there's a force of nature. She's the family's political grenade, fiercely Christian, sharp as a knife, and ambitious enough to make Machiavelli look like a nervous intern. Most importantly, she's the mother of Olaf, who's busy making a name for himself as both a king and, eventually, a saint. Yes, your older half-brother is none other than Saint Olaf. That's the dinner table you're born into. Imagine trying to sneak a second helping of stew while your family is either plotting a coup or praying for your immortal soul. From day one, you're treated less like a child and more like a pawn in a never-ending game of Viking chess. By the time you're 10, you're swinging a sword like it's a wooden spoon. At 11, you're on horseback, learning not just how to ride, but how to ride away fast when things go sideways. And at 15, while most kids are still trying to survive puberty, you're riding into battle beside your famous brother. No fancy armor, no poetic war paint, just a boy in chainmail, fueled by way too much optimism and not nearly enough common sense. The year is 130. Olaf, after years in exile, is marching home to reclaim his crown. He scraped together a ragged army of loyalists, misfits, and desperate men. You, barely old enough to grow a proper beard, are right there with him, riding into the infamous Battle of Stiklestad. The odds are laughable, but nobody's laughing. The fight is brutal, and if you thought battle was all glory and heroic death scenes, reality is happy to smash that illusion with the blunt end of a Danish axe. Olaf is killed. You're wounded, dazed, and suddenly on the wrong side of history. In the chaos, you stagger away with a handful of survivors, fleeing into the mountains. Childhood, such as it was, ends right there in blood, ash, and frantic retreat. But that's just the opening act. You're no longer a prince in waiting. You're a fugitive, a survivor, a teenager with more scars than stories. Exile isn't a choice. It's the only move left on the board. You slip eastward, away from the smoking ruin of your brother's ambitions, crossing over the snow-choked mountains into the strange, sprawling realm of Kievan Rus. Now, for most Norwegians, this would be a death sentence. But you see it differently. Kievan Rus at this point is a rising superpower, a heady stew of Slavic, Norse, and Byzantine influences, ruled by the shrewd and famously well-connected Yaroslav the Wise. You arrive at his court, battered, broke, and carrying nothing but your bloodline and the memory of defeat. Lucky for you, Yaroslav has a soft spot for exiled Viking royalty. Even luckier, his palace is already crawling with Norse mercenaries, each one eager for coin, glory, or just a warm meal. Don't get comfortable, though. This isn't some cozy guest room arrangement. Yaroslav's hospitality comes with a sword in one hand and a contract in the other. You sign up as a mercenary, and soon enough, you're back to doing what you do best, fighting. You take on raiders, steppe nomads, and rebellious princes who think the world owes them a throne. The pay is decent, the scars are plentiful, and the reputation you earn is, frankly, terrifying. You're not just another imported brute. You become known for your discipline, your tactical cunning, and a capacity for violence that makes your fellow Vikings look positively soft. Within a year of arriving, Yaroslav trusts you enough to give you command of troops. You, the exiled teenager, suddenly find yourself leading men twice your age into battle. The court whispers, sometimes about your skill, sometimes about your height. Since, let's be honest, you really are a giant by the standards of the day, and sometimes about your rumored romance with one of Yaroslav's many daughters. Is it true? The historical record gets a bit fuzzy here. But let's just say you're not exactly going home alone at the end of every feast. We'll circle back to the love life later. Right now, it's your reputation that matters. You're no longer fighting for Norway, not even for Kievan Rus. You're fighting for yourself. Every victory, every clever maneuver is a brick in the fortress of your future. You become something far more dangerous than a lost prince. You become a professional survivor, an operator. a warlord with no home, no master, and absolutely zero intention of fading quietly into the background. But you're not planning to stay in Rus forever. For all its silver and opportunity, it's just a forge, a place to sharpen your blade, harden your heart, and build the kind of resume that gets you noticed in the wider world. And your eyes are already drifting south, toward the greatest prize of the medieval world, Constantinople. The city the Norse call Miklagard, the great city. A place so rich its walls are taller than your childhood ambitions and twice as forbidding. By the late 1030s, you've made up your mind. Constantinople is the richest city on earth, a place where gold and intrigue drip from every marble pillar. And the Byzantine emperor is always looking for men who can swing a sword without asking too many questions. You pack your armor, say your goodbyes, possibly to a tearful princess, though we're not here to spread any gossip, and set out for the city where history is written, not in sagas, but in silk and blood. Arriving in Constantinople is like stepping onto another planet. The domes glitter in the sun, the streets pulse with traders from every corner of the known world, and the air itself smells of spices, sweat, and secrets. For a Viking raised on smoked fish and snowdrifts, it's an overwhelming sensory assault. But you adapt. You always do. You join the Varangian Guard, the Emperor's elite strike force, basically the original Foreign Legion, except everyone's taller and much, much angrier. These are not just hired swords. They're a living wall between the Emperor and the endless parade of assassins, rebels, and overambitious cousins. The job description is simple. Guard the Emperor, fight his wars, and, if necessary, remove troublesome rivals with extreme prejudice. You don't just blend in, you stand out. Your height alone is enough to turn heads, but it's your ferocity and tactical brilliance that really get you noticed. While most warriors are content to charge straight ahead, you're the one flanking, feinting, and ambushing from the shadows. You climb the ranks with dizzying speed. Soon, you're leading men into battle, not just on the walls of Constantinople, but across the empire's far-flung frontiers. The campaign list reads like a medieval travel brochure for the criminally insane. Sicily is where you crush Arab rebels and get your first taste of Mediterranean sunshine, and, we can safely assume, experience some regrettable sunburns along the way. The Aegean, where you hunt pirates who think they can outrow a Viking. Anatolia, where you march through endless fields of dust, chasing rebels who refuse to stay conquered. You even reach Jerusalem, where, according to legend, you bathe in the River Jordan and make a private vow to someday rule a kingdom of your own. Nothing like a holy dip to refresh your sense of divine destiny. But don't get the wrong idea. This isn't just hack and slash. You're watching, learning, and, most importantly, plotting. Byzantine politics make Norwegian court life look like a kindergarten birthday party. The palace is a viper's nest of ambitious courtiers, scheming eunuchs, and generals with daggers hidden up both sleeves. You're never sure if the man pouring your wine is about to poison you or just spill it on your shoes. Still, you survive. You thrive. You even prosper. The gold flows in from plunder, bribes, and imperial gifts. Some whisper that you stash away treasure in secret, planning for the day you might need a quick exit. You trade your old furs for silk, your bronze for gold, and your harsh northern accent for just enough Greek to swear colorfully at palace officials. Yet, for all the luxury and intrigue, you never forget why you're here. You're not content guarding someone else's throne. You've spent nearly a decade as the emperor's favorite hammer, and the city's rumor mill is starting to churn. The emperor grows wary. You've got too much money, too many friends among the guard, and just enough ambition to make the palace nervous. The writing is on the wall, and you can read it in every nervous glance and every carefully phrased invitation to dinner. So, once again, you do what you do best. You leave. Not quietly, not meekly, but with the same blend of cunning and raw force that's gotten you this far. You slip out of the Byzantine web, richer, smarter, and twice as dangerous. Your next destination? Home. Norway. But this time, you're not returning as a battered exile. You're coming back as a war-forged, gold-laden veteran with a private army and enough battlefield experience to make the local kings shiver in their fur-lined boots. When you finally set foot in Scandinavia around 1045, Norway is not exactly rolling out the royal welcome mat. There's already a king on the throne, Magnus the Good, the illegitimate son of your late half-brother, Saint Olaf. Magnus has managed to hold the country together, uniting both Norway and Denmark, and for a while, he actually seems to be doing a decent job. But what Magnus doesn't have is your experience, your Byzantine gold, or your relentless drive to rule. So, what do? You hire an army. Using the mountain of treasure you've stacked up, you recruit the toughest warriors from Rus and Sweden, then make a deal with Svein Estridsson, Magnus's biggest rival in Denmark. You promise to help Svein reclaim Denmark if he'll help you challenge Magnus for Norway. It's a partnership built on mutual suspicion and a shared love of naval warfare. Think of it as the medieval version of a buddy cop movie, except everyone's armed and nobody's funny. But here's the twist. You don't even need to invade. Magnus, sensing that a bloody civil war is about to break out, does the unthinkable. He offers to share the throne with you. You, the wandering warlord, and Magnus, the homegrown king, ruling together. It's a setup doomed from the start, like forcing a lion and a lamb to split a dinner plate. Predictably, it lasts about as long as a palace feast without someone getting stabbed. 2 years into this awkward arrangement, Magnus dies. Some say it was illness, others whisper poison. But either way, you don't bother with public displays of grief. You seize the throne with all the subtlety of a Viking at an open bar. Norway is yours. And you make it very clear you're not sharing. But you're not done yet. Denmark still taunts you from across the water. For nearly 20 years, you hammer the Danish coasts, raids, battles, scorched villages. You plunder, you burn, you leave a trail of smouldering resentment. Yet, for all your efforts, you never quite manage to hold Denmark. Svein survives. The throne remains just out of reach. And you learn, once again, that even the most ruthless kings can't have everything. Still, Norway is yours. You rule as a man who has fought for every inch of your crown, who has seen kingdoms rise and fall, and who still dreams of more. But there's one prize left, one last kingdom that keeps you up at night. And as your gaze turns west, you begin plotting the campaign that will define you, not just as a king, but as the last true Viking monarch. So, by the late 1040s, Harald Hardrada isn't just a battered survivor with a taste for gold and blood. You are the king of Norway, the ultimate Viking warlord. And, as it turns out, you're about to launch the final campaign of an era. This is where your legend truly begins. And, trust me, the world won't sleep through what comes next. Now, you're not just sitting on the throne of Norway. You're practically welded to it, brooding over the land like the world's last great action hero, who also moonlights as a poetry nerd. You're Harald Hardrada, the final word in Viking royalty. And nobody's going to let you forget it. Not your subjects, not your enemies, and certainly not me, your perpetually exhausted court biographer, who has to immortalize every one of your legendary tax hikes and dramatic hair flips. You rule Norway like an emperor who's read too many Byzantine instruction manuals and then decided to tear out all the pages about mercy. Your taxes go up, your power gets centralized, and anyone who even hints at dissent either ends up kissing your ring or mysteriously vanishes, probably not off to a nice farm upstate. You keep a standing army and a navy ready to sail at a moment's notice, which is wildly extravagant for a Norwegian king. But hey, you're not here to pinch pennies or skimp on chainmail. You build churches, mint coins with your own scowling face, and let the world know that Norway isn't some forgotten icebox at the edge of civilization anymore. It's a real kingdom now, complete with all the headaches and homicidal relatives that entails. But don't let anyone call you a tyrant. You're not cruel. You're just operating on Viking royal logic, which means loyalty is nice, but only after everyone's agreed to absolute obedience. Peace is great, but only if it's your peace, on your terms, and delivered with a side order of military intimidation. If some chieftain gets ideas above his station, you send in the troops. If peasants start grumbling about unfair taxes, well, there's nothing like a quick sword demonstration to restore perspective. You're not evil. You're just the only adult in a kingdom full of toddlers with axes. Of course, there's more to you than cold steel. Under that helmet, you're a man of culture. You compose poetry. About yourself, obviously, because why waste time flattering anyone else? You sponsor skalds who immortalize your exploits in verses so florid they practically need their own footnotes. You keep trade routes humming all the way from Norway to Byzantium, just in case you need to stash some emergency gold in a more stable currency. You even keep up a pen-pal relationship with the Byzantine emperors, because friends in high places are always useful, especially if you ever feel nostalgic for the taste of Greek wine and court intrigue. But let's not forget your favorite summer activity. The annual war with Denmark. Like clockwork, every year you load up the ships, sail south, and remind King Svein Estridsson that you're still alive and very much in the mood to pillage. These aren't wars for territory anymore. They're just highly aggressive reminders of your unresolved issues. You could probably just send a fruit basket, but where's the fun in that? And yet, even you can't ignore the creeping grey at your temples. By the early 1060s, you start prepping your son, Olaf Kide, for the throne. You probably imagine yourself fading triumphantly into legend. Maybe dying peacefully in a feather bed with your loyal warriors gathered around. Perhaps even getting to sleep for once without worrying about some cousin poisoning your mead. But then, out of nowhere, 1066 looms on the horizon, the real year of destiny. This isn't just another date to scribble in the royal diary. This is the year that promises to make you either a legend or a tragic cautionary tale. The kind they'll write sagas about for centuries. Edward the Confessor, King of England, drops dead without an heir. The English throne is suddenly up for grabs, and every ambitious monarch in Western Europe starts sharpening their swords and dusting off their genealogies. Harold Godwinson snatches the crown. William of Normandy starts plotting his own invasion. And then there's you, because why not? You have the thinnest of claims to the English throne, courtesy of a vague old agreement with King Nut, who once ruled both England and Denmark. Is your claim airtight? Not even close. But in Viking math, one dubious family tree, plus a few thousand angry men with axes, equals a legitimate shot at the crown. So, you form an alliance with Tostig Godwinson, the exiled and deeply bitter brother of England's new king. Tostig promises you English support, or at least a guided tour of the best places to loot. You promise him steel and a front row seat at whatever carnage follows. Together, you muster nearly 300 longships and more than 10,000 warriors. This isn't a raid. It's not even a flex. It's a full-blown invasion, the last of its kind. You sail across the North Sea just as your ancestors did. Except this time you're not after monasteries and livestock. You're aiming for a crown. September 1066. You land near the Humber, your longships lined up like teeth along the riverbank. The English are caught with their pants down, scrambling to assemble a defence. At the Battle of Fulford, you smash a cobbled-together force under the local earls. It's not even close. York throws open its gates. For a brief, glorious moment, it feels like the old Viking magic is back. You're on top of the world, and England looks soft, rich, and ripe for the taking. You set up camp at Stamford Bridge, demand hostages, and probably start composing a victory poem in your head. And then, just when you're starting to relax, fate throws a curveball. Harold Godwinson, the English king, force marches his army from London to the north in record time. We're talking nearly 200 miles in under a week. A logistical nightmare, if you ask me, especially considering the state of medieval roads and the average Anglo-Saxon's fondness for midday naps. On September 25th, just as you're settling in for a nice, easy hostage negotiation, the English army appears on the horizon. Your men are scattered, armorless, expecting a nice chat, maybe some light extortion, not the battle of their lives. What happens next isn't just a reversal. It's history's equivalent of having your victory parade interrupted by a stampede of angry sheep. The English hit hard and fast. The Vikings fight like cornered wolves, but they're outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and, let's be honest, half-dressed. Legends say one berserker blocked the bridge single-handedly, swinging his axe and holding up the English advance, turning himself into instant saga material. They say he killed over 40 men before someone finally speared him from below, proving once again that even legends have expiration dates. You, Harold, realize far too late that this is not the day for poetry or negotiations. You scramble to form a shield wall, but it's chaos. Warriors arrive 2 by 2, frantically throwing themselves into the line as arrows rain down. English cavalry slams into your flanks. The shield wall holds barely. You swing your sword like a god of war, roaring above the din, trying to turn back the tide with sheer willpower. You kill, you bleed, you stagger. And then, almost as if the gods themselves are bored of this act, an arrow cuts through the noise and finds its mark. Straight through your windpipe. You fall, not with a poetic speech or a final curse, but in the middle of the mud and blood, sword still in your hand, breath stolen before you can even utter your last line. The last great Viking king dies on a damp English field, and with you, the Viking age itself gasps its final breath. By the time your reinforcements, led by your standard-bearer Eystein Order, finally arrive, the field is already a graveyard. Eystein dies in a hopeless counterattack, and the survivors limp back to the ships, bloodied and broken. Out of that mighty armada of 300 longships, only 24 are needed to carry the battered survivors home. You don't just lose a battle. You close the book on centuries of Viking conquest with a wet, bloody thud. And just to add insult to injury, your glorious disaster creates a butterfly effect. Harold Godwinson, fresh from dismantling your invasion, barely has time to catch his breath before he gets word that William of Normandy has landed in the south. 3 weeks after Stamford Bridge, Godwinson goes down at Hastings, and England slips into Norman hands. So in a weird cosmic joke, your failed invasion actually weakens England, just enough for someone else to snatch the crown. Back in Norway, the news of your demise hits like an ice bath. You were supposed to be invincible, the hero of Russes, the living thunderstorm of Byzantium, the king who made Norway more than just a snowy footnote. Now you're gone, and your son Olaf Kyrre takes the throne. But Olaf is no Hardrada. He prefers commerce to carnage, Christianity to chaos. Under him, Norway finds peace. The longships become merchant vessels. The old wild fire cools into the gentle glow of politics and trade. No more berserkers charging monasteries. No more kings with visions of England dancing in their heads. The sagas keep singing, but now they're about ghosts. The men who lived them are gone. The world turns its gaze inward, and the Viking age quietly dissolves into the medieval dawn. But you, Harold, you aren't so easily erased. Your life is the last great Norse epic, the kind of story that keeps historians up at night and inspires generations of saga writers to sharpen their quills. You traveled farther than any other king, fought in more wars, gathered more loot, and built more legends. You wrote poetry and burned villages. You built churches and broke armies. You were a brute and a bard, a builder and a destroyer. Nobody argues about your greatness. Your name echoes in 3 empires, from the icy fjords of Norway to the sun-baked domes of Constantinople to the blood-soaked fields of England. Your poetry survives, and your exploits still baffle scholars and inspire screenwriters, all trying to figure out how one man managed to fit 3 lifetimes of adventure, disaster, and drama into a single sleep-deprived existence. Even your nickname, Hardrada, the Hard Ruler, is less an insult than a warning label. You didn't bend. You ruled as you lived, intense, uncompromising, and always ready for one more fight. After your death, Norway changes. Olaf Kyrre ushers in an era of peace, trade, and cautious optimism. The sword is finally sheathed, and the Viking era drifts into memory. But you refuse to go quietly. In Norway, you become a national icon. In Iceland, you're a saga superstar. In England, you're a cautionary tale whispered by nervous kings. In Byzantium, you're the ghost of the north who once guarded emperors. You are the last Viking king, and you die as you lived, sword drawn, chasing glory, too stubborn to fade into the footnotes. When the long ships stop sailing and the mead halls finally fall silent, the world moves on. But Harald Hardrada makes sure it'll always remember your name, even if half the stories are about your taxes and the other half are about you accidentally starting the Norman conquest. History isn't fair, but it is persistent. Now, as the embers of your legend flicker in the twilight of the Viking Age, we turn to the rituals that tried, and usually failed, to do justice to men like you. Because for the Vikings, a king's final journey wasn't just about the man, but about the ship that carried him into legend. And that's where we're headed next. For you, the concept of a Viking ship burial is less about some quaint scene from a museum diorama, and more like the ultimate royal PR stunt, equal parts spectacle, statement, and, of course, logistical nightmare. You know the drill. In the Viking world, a ship isn't just your ride, it's your resume, your passport, your Instagram feed, and your ticket to whatever comes after you've shuffled off this mortal coil. When you die as a Viking chieftain, or, let's be honest, even as a minor aristocrat with the right connections, your corpse doesn't just get tossed into a hole. No, you're going out in style. And by style, I mean you're about to become the centerpiece of a floating, then buried myth. So, let's talk about meaning. To the Vikings, the ship is everything. It's the thing that brought you glory, that ferried you to battle, that carried home loot, gossip, and the occasional parasite from foreign lands. But when you die, the ship becomes your bridge to the next world. Not a metaphorical bridge, mind you. In the Viking mindset, this is the literal vehicle that will carry you across the great cosmic sea. No ticket required. But you'd better have the right grave goods, or you'll be paddling yourself. This isn't just some sweet bedtime story to make you feel better about dying in your 50s. It's a law. Not a law you can repeal by popular vote either. Life is a voyage, death is the next leg, and your ship, that's your golden chariot. Miss the boat, and you're not making it to the afterlife. No pressure. Now, let's set the scene. This isn't a slapdash operation. Your ship will likely be a real beauty, maybe 70 feet long, with a dragon's head carved into the prow, part intimidation, part ancient version of a personalized license plate. These ships are not just seaworthy, they're status symbols. Every plank, every iron nail, every bit of carving is shouting, this person mattered. And you, of course, are lying right in the middle of it, preferably on a bed of furs, surrounded by the finest the Viking world can offer. Silk, if you can get it. Wool if you can't. Don't worry, even the afterlife has a hierarchy. Then come the grave goods. Forget flowers and eulogies. You get weapons, sword, axe, shield, spear, because apparently the afterlife is not a peaceful retirement. You get tools, because even the dead can't avoid chores. Clothes, jewelry, sometimes even your favorite drinking horn, just in case there's mead wherever you're headed. And here's where things get a little dark. Sometimes you get company. Human company. Slaves, servants, sometimes even friends or rivals who drew the short straw. They're sacrificed to serve you in the next world. Horses are popular too, nothing says. VIP entrance to Valhalla, like a few fresh horses at your side. Occasionally, you even get a hawk. No one ever accused the Vikings of subtlety. Now, before you start feeling squeamish, let me remind you, to us, all of this sounds absolutely brutal. To the Vikings, this is the highest honor. It's not about cruelty. It's about loyalty. A ship burial is the gold standard of funerals, a way to ensure you don't just leave, but you leave with a bang. And when the time comes, the whole ship is buried under a mountain of earth, forming a mound so big it can be seen for miles. This isn't just a grave. It's a billboard. Here lies someone whose death shook the earth. Step carefully. Of course, if you're thinking this is a boys-only club, think again. Some of the grandest ship burials in Viking history were for women. Case in point, the Oseberg burial. 2 women, one older, almost certainly a queen or maybe a high priestess. The other possibly her trusted servant or perhaps a fellow priestess, sent off in a ship so ornate it makes a royal yacht look understated. Silk gowns, woolen cloaks, sledges, chests, buckets, even a 4-wheeled cart so elaborately carved you'd think it was meant for a parade, not a grave. To top it off, 2 sacrificed oxen at the prow. Clearly, subtlety was not the order of the day. Let's dig into the Oseberg ship for a moment, unearthed in 1904 by some very surprised Norwegian farmers who thought they were just clearing land, only to hit the mother of all time capsules. 70 feet long, snaking out of the clay almost untouched by the centuries, its prow curled up in a serpentine arch, every inch covered in carvings that would make even the most jaded artisan weep. This wasn't a warship. It was a ceremonial hearse, a floating cathedral, a royal limousine designed for the most important final journey of all. Inside, those 2 women, one draped in silks and wool, her bones telling the story of age and authority, surrounded by an armada of grave goods. Carved sledges, buckets, animal bones, chests full of textiles, and a cart with wheels so ornate they could have rolled through a cathedral. Next to her, the remains of a second woman, younger, perhaps a servant or a priestess. The message is clear. Power didn't just belong to the men swinging swords. Sometimes it was the women calling the shots from behind the scenes or from beyond the grave. Now, shift scenes to the Gokstad ship, discovered in 1880, and you'll see a different vibe entirely. This ship is all business, sleek, armed for war, built for speed. Inside, a man in his 40s, likely a chieftain or a king, his name lost to history, his importance carved in every plank. Shields line the sides, beds and weapons are stacked nearby, and he's not alone. 12 horses, 6 dogs, and, for that extra dash of international flair, 2 peacocks. Yes, peacocks. Because why not let your neighbors know that you not only raided the world, you brought it home with you, feathers and all. But what do these ship graves really tell you? More than just wealth, they're an open window into Viking beliefs. The Oseberg burial is a tapestry of ritual and female authority. The Gokstad ship is a manifesto of prestige, conquest, and global swagger. Together, they reveal that for Vikings, death wasn't the end. It was simply the next voyage, and you'd better pack accordingly. If you're picturing a Viking funeral as the grandest, most dramatic send-off imaginable, you're not wrong. These weren't funerals. They were launches, cosmic parties designed to make sure nobody forgets your name, or your legendary charisma, or your tendency to overdo things. Ship burials. They're the headline act. The ritual starts with the body. Forget the image of a body flopped carelessly onto a pyre. No, you're washed, dressed in your finest, silks if you've got them, embroidered wool if you don't, jewelry and symbols of status, if you want to make sure the gods are paying attention. Sometimes you're even posed, serenely asleep or sitting upright, like you're about to deliver one last rousing speech. And then come the rituals. This is where things go from dramatic to downright shocking. Accounts from the likes of Ahmad ibn Fadlan, an Arab diplomat who witnessed Viking funerals among the Rus in Eastern Europe, give us a front-row seat to the spectacle. When a chieftain dies, sometimes a slave girl volunteers, or is volunteered, depending on how lucky she feels, to join him in death. She's treated like royalty for a few days, washed, dressed, and paraded around, only for the final act to involve a grim sacrifice. Strangling, stabbing, chanting, drums, and a haze of alcohol-fueled ecstasy. It's not for the faint of heart, but to the Vikings, this was all about honor. You don't go into the next world alone. You go with your entourage, whether they like it or not. And the animals? Horses are a favorite, slaughtered to carry you into the next world, because apparently even in death, walking is beneath you. Dogs, hawks, and, in some cases, cows join the party. Sometimes, the ship is surrounded by a circle of stones, marking the boundary between this world and the next. The symbolism is thick enough to wade through. But not every ship burial ends with a mound in the earth. Sometimes the Vikings really do go full Hollywood, setting the ship ablaze and pushing it out to sea, flames licking the sky as your friends and rivals watch from the shore, trying to look stoic and not think about how much firewood that cost. It's dramatic, yes, but it's also mostly myth. In reality, buried ships, carefully preserved under soil or stone, are far more common in the archaeological record. Viking history, it turns out, is a lot less flammable than the movies would have you believe. Why the difference? Burning a ship is expensive, not to mention a logistical nightmare. Those big, beautiful ships aren't easy to build, and destroying one just to make a point isn't always practical. Besides, burial leaves behind a legacy, a mound, a monument, something for future generations to trip over and excavate. A burning ship leaves only ashes and stories. Still, the idea of a flaming ship is powerful. Fire was sacred to the Norse. It purified, transformed, and sent souls flying to the gods above. Even if most ship burials relied on earth rather than fire, the legend of the burning ship persisted because it captured the imagination. Who doesn't want to believe that, in the end, you go out in a blaze of glory? Literally. But here's the real twist. These burials weren't just about religion. They were about politics. A ship burial was a public performance. The bigger the mound, the louder the message. This was no ordinary leader. This was someone the gods themselves might envy. It was a way for families to cement their claim to power, for rivals to tremble, for history to take note. Nothing says, "I mattered," like a ship buried beneath a mountain with your name attached to it. And just when you think you've got Viking funerals figured out, the graves throw another curveball. Women get ship burials, and peacocks turn up, where you'd expect only swords. The boundaries between ritual, status, gender, and myth are as tangled as a Viking's beard after a long voyage. So, if you're ever feeling the weight of your own legacy, just remember, in the Viking world, your final PR campaign was as much about how you were remembered as about where you were going. A ship burial wasn't just a way to say goodbye. It was a declaration, a floating temple, an anchor of memory, and a thunderous announcement. I was here. And if you think only the men got to ride into the afterlife in style, well, think again. Forget the stereotype of Viking women waiting at home, weaving by the hearth. The real story is about to get a lot more interesting. No more tired images of Viking women quietly spinning wool in some smoky longhouse, glancing wistfully at the fjord while their husbands are off pillaging. If you want the real story, the one that future generations will whisper about after reading my tell-all royal chronicle, you need to look at their funerals. Because in death, just like in life, Norse women could command the kind of spectacle and status that would make even the most swaggering chieftain polish his helmet in envy. And nowhere is this more obvious than in the ship burials of the Viking Age, where women were not only present, they were front and center, sometimes outshining the men entirely. Take the Oseberg burial. I know you've heard of it, because you can't be a self-respecting, overworked royal biographer like me and not have to reference Oseberg at least twice a week. Dug up in 1904, the site revealed not one, but two women. One was older, seasoned, maybe the sort who could terrify a roomful of jarls with a single raised eyebrow. The other is younger, perhaps an apprentice, a daughter, or simply someone fortunate, or maybe unfortunate, enough to share in this final voyage. Both were laid out in a ship so outrageously elaborate that it could have rolled straight out of a fever dream. A sweeping hull, curling dragon heads, planks so perfectly joined that modern shipwrights still get misty-eyed over them. But here's the twist. This wasn't a warrior's send-off, no piles of axes, no mountain of shields. This was a queen's grave, or, if you really want the backstage pass, possibly a vulva's. And yes, I know what you're thinking. No, not that kind of vulva. In Norse society, a vulva was a seeress, a sorceress, a priestess, who straddled the boundaries between the living and the dead. The grave goods in Oseberg paint a picture so vivid it might as well have come with a set of stage directions. Ceremonial staffs, wooden wands, bundles of herbs, and the bones of animals arranged not for dinner, but for ritual. If the main woman was indeed a vulva, then this burial wasn't just a nod to political power. It was a spectacle honoring spiritual might, the kind of authority that had kings consulting you on their worst days, and peasants crossing the street to avoid accidentally catching your eye. And don't get me started on the loot. Sledges and carts built for parades, textiles richer than anything you'd see at a modern runway show, tapestries so intricate that you suspect the gods themselves got bored halfway through. There was imported silk because, let's face it, even the afterlife deserves a touch of the exotic. There were ceremonial beds and sacrificed animals packed in so tightly that you start to wonder if this was a funeral or a particularly competitive episode of Viking hoarders. All of it crammed around these women as if they weren't just heading to the afterlife. They were marching in to take charge, assign new chores, and maybe redecorate. And Oseberg is just the opening act. The so-called Gorsel Queen, buried near Stavanger, was laid to rest with gold jewelry, imported bronze cups, and the kind of riding gear that screams, "Yes, I will be taking my horse with me. Thank you very much." Her grave practically radiated status. If there had been neon in the 9th century, it would have been blinking VIP over her mound. The Ladby ship, too, hints at high-status female burials, and the academic world is still locked in heated debate over whether some weapon-filled warrior graves might actually have belonged to women. DNA from a grave in Birka, Sweden, for instance, revealed that one high-ranking male warrior buried with a full arsenal was, in fact, biologically female. Yes, you heard me right. Sometimes, when the helmet comes off, it turns out the real conqueror was the woman you weren't paying enough attention to. So what does all this mean for you, the would-be Norse ruler with delusions of Valhalla grandeur? It means that, in Viking culture, women could hold power, real power, the kind you could take with you, even after your pulse had stopped and your enemies were dividing your silverware. Whether you were the daughter of a king, a queen in your own right, a priestess of the old ways, or a shield maiden who could swing an axe as well as any man, you didn't just get tacked onto the funeral as an afterthought. Sometimes you were the main event. Sometimes you were the king. Now, let's talk about the ship itself, the ultimate Viking status symbol. When you were buried in a ship, you didn't go alone. Oh no, you were sent off with a meticulously curated collection of grave goods, a sort of afterlife starter kit, packed by relatives who clearly believed that you shouldn't have to rough it just because you were dead. But this isn't just about swords and silver. These ships are time capsules, sealed beneath earth and turf, giving us the weirdest, most fascinating window into Viking life and death. First up, the weapons. Practically every elite ship burial features them. Swords with hilts decorated in writhing animal patterns, spears that look like they're waiting for the next raiding season, shields painted with mythic symbols, and axes so sharp you could shave with them if you were feeling particularly reckless. But before you get visions of ghostly warriors dueling in Valhalla, remember, these weapons weren't just for show. They were statements. A sword wasn't just a tool. It was a badge of honor, a portable resume, a reminder to the living that you were, in fact, a big deal. Sometimes The blades were deliberately bent or broken before burial, not as an insult, but as a way to kill the weapon, so it could accompany its owner into the next world. Even in death, Vikings had to deal with paperwork. But weapons alone don't make a home, or a floating afterlife condo in this case. Everyday items were packed in too: combs, cooking pots, whetstones, and, in a move that will be relatable to anyone who has ever been stuck somewhere with nothing to do, board games. Yes, even the dead needed to pass the time, perhaps with a quick round of Nefertafla while waiting for Ragnarok. The afterlife, as it turns out, wasn't imagined as one long battle. Sometimes you had to brush your hair, cook a meal, and try not to lose your last pawn to an overly competitive ancestor. And then there were the animals. Lots of animals. The Gokstad burial, for example, yielded the remains of a veritable menagerie: 12 horses, 8 dogs, and, because apparently someone wanted to make a statement, 2 peacocks. That's right, peacocks. Horses were believed to carry the soul on its journey. Dogs were loyal companions, and the peacocks. Maybe a status symbol, maybe a last glorious middle finger to anyone who thought you'd be content with just another sheep. Either way, those birds must have been the talk of the afterlife. Of course, the most unsettling grave goods were people. Slaves, servants, or retainers, sometimes sacrificed and placed in the ship to serve their master in the next world. Whether they went willingly or simply drew the short straw is a matter archaeologists still debate. But their presence speaks volumes about what Vikings believed was owed to the powerful, even beyond the grave. In the world of Viking death, loyalty had no retirement plan. Every single object in a ship burial was chosen for a reason. Each one told a story. This person was a warrior. That one loved fine clothing. Another had a taste for imported luxuries, and someone else had political authority that reached beyond the grave. Grave goods weren't random clutter. They were a final biography, written in gold, iron, and bone. Once the ship was packed, sealed, and tucked under a burial mound, it became a floating home beneath the earth. The dead didn't just depart. They left behind a message, one more carefully crafted than most political speeches I've been forced to transcribe. Now, before you assume all this drama was limited to the fjords of Norway, let me stop you. Viking ship burials weren't some boutique custom reserved for a handful of lucky nobles. From icy Scandinavia to the river valleys of Eastern Europe, these rituals took on distinct forms, each tailored to local tradition, landscape, and politics. Norway, with its rugged terrain and convenient lack of modern construction projects, gives us the best preserved examples. Think grand, mound-covered ships buried with kings, queens, and anyone who could bully enough peasants into digging a big hole. Monumentality was the name of the game. Burial mounds so large they doubled as real estate landmarks, ships carved with mythic images, and a masterclass in "Look at me, I'm still important," even now. In Sweden, though, they took a different approach. At sites like Vendel and Valsgärde, sometimes only the shape of the ship was outlined with stones, a skeleton frame stretching across the grass. These stone ship settings often contained cremation burials, ashes placed in urns or scattered within the ship's outline. The Swedes, ever practical, loved this hybrid of fire and stone. They got the symbolism without the need for massive earthworks or the risk of someone's ship rotting away in the mud. Now, let's row east. The Rus, those Norse-descended warriors and traders who set up shop along the river routes of what's now Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, had their own spin on things. The most dramatic account comes from Ibn Fadlan, who witnessed a ship-burning ceremony on the Volga. Picture it. The corpse laid out on a boat, surrounded by treasures, animals, and sometimes people. The whole thing set ablaze in a theatrical send-off that would put any modern Viking-themed TV show to shame. Archaeological evidence of full ship burials in the East is rarer, but boat-shaped mounds and grave goods echo that same core idea. Death is a journey, and you need a vessel. Plus, let's face it, if anyone was going to go out with a bang, it was the Rus. Denmark gets a little less attention, mostly because the marshy soil there is terrible for ship preservation. Still, stone ship settings and elite graves with seafaring symbols show that the practice, though less flashy, was alive and well. Even in Scotland, Ireland, and the Baltic, boat-shaped graves appear now and then. Sometimes they're literal ships, sometimes just stones arranged in a long oval. Wherever the Vikings sailed, they brought their belief in the ship as the ultimate vehicle, across water, across time, across the threshold of death itself. The ship burial was adaptable. It evolved. Yet the message stayed the same. You don't shuffle into the afterlife in sandals. You set sail. For Vikings, death wasn't an ending. It was a departure. That's why ship burials still feel so powerful and mysterious today. They were never just about honoring the dead with a bit of pageantry. They were rooted in a mythic belief that the afterlife was a journey and the soul needed a vessel to get there. In Norse cosmology, the world was surrounded by water, from the great ocean encircling Midgard to the rivers dividing realms. Life came from the sea, so naturally, death returned to it. Ships weren't just for trading, raiding, or showing off at festivals. In the old stories, they were spiritual bridges. Take Naglfar, the ship made from the fingernails of the dead, which will one day sail at Ragnarok to unleash chaos on the gods. Or Skidbladnir, Freya's magical ship, which could be folded up and carried in a pocket, but would always have a favorable wind. These mythic vessels weren't just tales told around the fire. They shaped actual burial practices. To be buried in a ship meant you were going somewhere, Valhalla perhaps, if you died gloriously in battle. Or Folkvanga, the field ruled by Freyja, where half the slain warriors would end up, since even the afterlife needs a little division of labor. Or, if you'd failed to impress, the shadowy realm of Hell, ruled by a half-rotting goddess who doesn't get nearly enough credit for her organizational skills. Wherever your soul was bound, you didn't walk, you sailed. And this wasn't just an elite's privilege. Even humble cremations sometimes featured boat shapes made from stones or wood, marking the passage across unseen waters. The ship was a metaphor made real, carving through both waves and worlds. Viking funeral ships were cosmic tools. By laying the dead in a vessel surrounded by weapons, animals, and treasure, the living weren't just provisioning a tomb, they were preparing a traveler for the ultimate crossing, arming them for whatever cosmic customs inspection awaited on the other side. To those left behind, the ship wasn't a final goodbye, it was a launch. a reminder that the journey didn't end in the grave. It just changed course. 1,000 years have passed since the last Viking ship burial slid beneath a mound. But those stories haven't stopped sailing. These vessels, once interred in silence, now speak louder than ever, through museum glass, through archaeological digs, through the imaginations of everyone who ever wondered what it would be like to rule, to see, to die, and to keep moving. The Oseberg, Gokstad, and Tune ships now rest in Norway's glass-walled museums, preserved not as grim relics, but as cultural treasures. Tourists crane their necks to stare at the curling prows, marveling at the craftsmanship, the symbolism, and the sheer bravado of people who turned a boat into a coffin and a grave into a cosmic gateway. And here's a little secret from your favorite exhausted court scribe. These ships were never meant to sail again. And yet they have, not across physical oceans, but through time. Not just archaeologists are listening either. Writers, filmmakers, and game designers continue to be inspired by Viking funerals. From the flaming send-offs in The 13th Warrior, or the animated spectacle in How to Train Your Dragon, to moody, slow-motion ships in Vikings, the image of the funeral ship has become the unofficial logo of Norse culture. Is it always historically accurate? Of course not. But the spirit remains. Death as a voyage, the ship as a symbol. Even today, Scandinavians feel the echo. Some Viking descendants request to have their ashes scattered at sea, or ceremonies modeled after ship burials. No sacrificial servants, thankfully, but still honoring that ancient connection between the vessel and the soul. A few bold archaeologists have even rebuilt burial ships, launching them on rivers to understand the engineering and, perhaps, the magic of the originals. What's truly astonishing is how much we've learned from these ships. Their timber tells us about vanished forests. Their construction reveals a level of engineering that would make even a Roman architect sweat. Their grave goods, peacocks, silk, silver coins, map out a Viking world far wider than anyone would guess from the sagas alone. In the end, the Viking ship burial wasn't just a funeral. It was a final performance. One last dramatic act in a life of war, trade, poetry, and power. And even now, these ships are still performing, reminding us that the dead were once alive, that myth and memory are tangled together, and that some vessels never really stop moving. They just sail through different seas. And if you think the Viking afterlife was complicated, wait until you hear about the medieval European court. Next up, the twisted, idealistic, and often completely impractical world of courtly love, where romance was less about marriage and more about poetry, pageantry, and the fine art of yearning for someone you couldn't actually have. Picture this. You, a knight in the echoing halls of a 12th century castle, sleepless and sighing, wrapped in the heavy velvet of your ceremonial cloak. Every step is a performance. You are surrounded by the clinking of goblets, the rustle of silk, the ever-watchful eyes of your rivals, and, crucially, the object of your affection, an impossibly aloof lady perched on her literal and metaphorical pedestal. You're not here to get married, start a family, or settle into a cozy manor with a vegetable patch and a couple of kids. No, your job is to suffer beautifully. Welcome to the bizarre world of courtly love, where the entire point is to ache for someone you can never actually have, and where heartbreak is the most fashionable accessory at court. By the time you're living this soap opera, courtly love has been codified into what can only be described as the world's most impractical rulebook. Imagine it as the original How to Lose a Girl in 10 Days, only with more chainmail and fewer happy endings. The rules are straightforward. If completely out of touch with reality, love must be secret. It must be difficult. And, above all, it must remain unfulfilled. The moment you actually get what you want, the whole thing falls apart. Purity lost, drama over, and you're just another knight with a boring love life. This peculiar tradition really takes off in southern France, specifically in the sunny courts of Aquitaine. But don't get any romantic ideas. This is less about genuine emotion and more about elaborate theatre. If you're a nobleman or a knight, your mission is to select a lady, ideally someone who's as unavailable as a palace kitchen after midnight. She's usually married, often several rungs above you on the social ladder, and surrounded by enough chaperones to make sure nothing ever happens. But you're expected to serenade her from a safe distance, armed with poetry, an aching heart, and an unshakable knack for looking tragic at banquets. Let's not sugarcoat it. This is emotional masochism in a velvet doublet. The more impossible your love, the more noble your suffering. In this upside-down world, agony is a badge of honor. The ideal knight isn't the one who gets the girl. He's the one who writes the saddest sonnet about not getting her, then rides off to skewer a few bandits for her sake. If you're nursing a heartbreak, congratulations. That's not a flaw. That's proof you're doing it right. But here's where the hypocrisy starts to smell stronger than the stables after a summer tournament. As you pour your soul into verses about your lady's golden hair and star-bright eyes, her marriage to Lord What's His, name carries on undisturbed. Everyone at court knows the script. The knight pines, the lady sighs, the husband eats another roast pheasant. And while the ideals of restraint and virtue get sung to the rafters, real history is riddled with secret affairs, midnight scandals, and the occasional duel over a misdelivered love letter. Courtly love claims to be pure, but let's just say the laundry bills were anything but. Still, the fantasy catches fire. Soon, every noble with a lute and a decent rhyming dictionary is in on the act. Poets, troubadours, and minstrels churn out tales of knights bleeding for love, ladies weeping for honor, and the kind of unfulfilled longing that makes modern breakups look like a minor inconvenience. Whether anyone actually feels this way is beside the point. The idea is contagious, reshaping how medieval Europe thinks about passion, power, and gender. Suddenly, love isn't just something that happens. It's a system, a code as rigid as any law, but much harder to follow when the wine starts flowing. Before Shakespeare ever penned a sonnet, you had troubadours, the original heartbroken influencers. These weren't rustic balladeers strumming away in smoky taverns about their lost sheep. They were high status, multilingual, and entirely too aware of how dangerous it was to compose odes to someone else's wife. The troubadour movement fires up in Occitania, that lush patch of southern France, around the late 11th century. They write in Occitan, a language as flowery as their intentions, and their favorite topic is always the same. Love that hurts, love you can't have, love that makes a knight wish he'd stuck to jousting. Their songs aren't background noise for a drunken feast. They're the main event in the candlelit great halls of castles, where every lord and lady secretly hopes the next stanza is about them. If you're good, you can make a duchess blush with a single line. If you're great, your song sparks a scandal that echoes through the family tree, complete with angry husbands and awkward Christmases for generations. Troubadours invent a whole vocabulary for this high-octane yearning, fin amour, or refined love. It's not about lust, at least not officially. It's about admiration, humility, and the slow torture of wanting someone you can't touch. The lady is always untouchable. Her praise is sung until she's more myth than mortal. The knight, meanwhile, proves his worth by suffering in silence, doing good deeds, and writing poetry that would make even the most seasoned therapist reach for a stiff drink. Some troubadours are more than just poetic messengers. Take Geoffrey Rudel, who claims to fall in love with a woman he's never even met, a medieval version of sliding into someone's DMs and declaring eternal devotion. Or Bernard de Ventadorn, who turns heartbreak into the medieval equivalent of a chart-topping single. And of course there's Eleanor of Aquitaine, the queen bee of this whole scene, who sponsors poets, inspires legends, and occasionally lives out the stories herself. These troubadours don't just invent love songs. They invent the very idea that expressing love through art is the noblest thing you can do. Their influence echoes from France to Italy, Germany, and eventually England, setting the blueprint for every lovesick bard and pop star to follow. The result? Courtly love becomes a full-blown cultural fever. Suddenly, every court across Europe is obsessed with the performance of desire. Love is no longer a private affair. It's a public spectacle, complete with costumes, tokens, and tear-soaked verses performed for an audience of equally repressed nobles. The troubadours aren't just singing for the court. They're teaching the court exactly how to love, or at least how to look good pretending. Let's talk about the women at the center of this melodrama, the muses, the goddesses, the unattainable ideals. In the world of courtly love, the lady is everything. Muse, judge, prize, and sometimes the hapless victim of her own reputation. She's placed on a pedestal so high, it's amazing anyone can see her through the incense smoke and the haze of unrequited devotion. Her beauty is described in impossibly poetic terms: skin like ivory, eyes like stars, hair spun from gold. But don't get too flattered. These ladies aren't real people in the eyes of the poets. They're living statues, symbols meant to inspire devotion and, ironically, a whole lot of suffering. For men, this setup is oddly liberating. Suddenly, it's not weak to cry, swoon, or compose embarrassingly earnest poetry. If you're a knight, emotional vulnerability gets a free pass, as long as it's directed at the right lady and wrapped up in enough flowery language. But for women, it's a golden cage. You're expected to inspire love without ever doing anything about it. You must maintain grace, dignity, and a reputation as pure as morning dew, all while being serenaded, stalked, and occasionally pestered by men who think a clever rhyme is a substitute for personal boundaries. Every now and then, a lady gets to flip the script, In some stories, she sets the knight impossible challenges, dispenses tokens, or tests his devotion with the kind of mind games that would make any reality TV producer jealous. But even this power is more symbolic than real. In truth, most noble women have about as much freedom as a palace cat, living in luxury, sure, but only as long as they stay exactly where they're supposed to. Many are married off before their 16th birthday, traded like expensive chess pieces in the endless game of dynastic alliances. Still, courtly love does one radical thing. It puts women at the center of the story. For an age when female voices are so often drowned out by the clanking of armor and the droning of monks, this is a rare spotlight. The lady becomes the reason for quests, the inspiration for songs, and the heart of the medieval romantic imagination. Some women, like Eleanor of Aquitaine and her daughter Marie de Champagne, play the game masterfully, patronizing poets, commissioning love stories, and sometimes using the culture for a little political leverage. But even at its best, courtly love is a game with no winners. The lady is adored, but never truly known. She's a fantasy in a crown, a character in someone else's daydream, and as we all know, fantasies don't get much say in how the story ends. Chivalry, by the way, doesn't start as a love story. It begins as a solid, if sweaty, set of battlefield rules. Loyalty to your lord, courage in the face of danger, and mercy for the defeated. But with courtly love in the mix, chivalry gets a velvet upgrade. Suddenly, every lance charge and every solemn oath can double as a love letter. Now, A Knight's Day is a 3-act tragedy. Pray to God at dawn, fight for your lord at noon, and pine for your lady by moonlight. The battlefield is no longer just about blood and glory. It's about earning a smile, a token, or, if you're lucky, a scarf that smells vaguely of rosewater and anxiety. Tournaments, once practical training sessions for bored nobles with too much armor and not enough wars, morph into full-blown love theaters. The list field is draped with banners, every knight parading his lady's favor like a sports fan with a giant foam finger. Winning isn't just about martial prowess anymore. It's about proving you're the most hopelessly devoted fool in the room. Chroniclers love to record stories of knights collapsing from exhaustion, rather than risk the shame of looking less committed than their rivals. A medieval version of no pain, no gain. Except the pain is mostly emotional, and the gain is a nod from someone who probably doesn't know your name. The discipline required would make even the most ascetic monk roll his eyes. Medieval love manuals, like Andreas Capellanus's De Amore, lay down the law. A true lover must be humble, discreet, and more concerned for his lady's reputation than his own life. He must endure rivals, keep secrets, and, here's the real kicker, rejoice in service, even if his love is never returned. The pain itself is the proof. Suffering is the sincerest form of flattery. But underneath all these velvet-wrapped ideals, reality is a lot less poetic. Castles still need garrisons, roads are full of bandits, and there's always another crusade on the horizon. That same knight who writes heartbreaking poetry by candlelight is out sharpening his sword at dawn, possibly while muttering about how even the gods don't get this much grief. And, as always, human hearts refuse to stick to the script. Plenty of knights and ladies ignore the rules entirely. Secret trysts happen, scandals erupt, reputations are shredded, and more than a few duels are fought over misunderstandings that would make for excellent reality television. But the ideal remains, beckoning from the pages of poetry and the smoke of the tournament field, a vision of harmony where courage meets courtesy, and a warrior's might bows to a lady's grace. In a world full of arranged marriages, political marriages, and very little actual romance, this fantasy is intoxicating. Yet every code invites a breach. Courtly love, with all its obsession over secrecy and longing, seems practically designed to encourage real-world disaster. Beneath the flowery verses and the pageantry of tournaments, the real temptations simmer. When fantasy steps off the page and into the bedroom, the results are explosive, sometimes literally. Take the saga of Peter Abelard and Heloise. Abelard is the medieval world's answer to a rock star philosopher, Heloise, his whip-smart teenage student. Their romance starts out like every courtly love song. Secret lessons lead to poetry. Poetry leads to stolen glances. And before long, things get very real, very quickly. The fallout is brutal. A furious uncle, a secret child, a forced marriage, Abelard's infamous castration, and both lovers ending up in separate monasteries, writing letters that are equal parts heartbreak and theological treatise. Courtly love promises ennobling devotion. Reality delivers mutilation and lifelong penance. Not even the highest echelons of power are immune. Eleanor of Aquitaine, queen of the troubadours, is rumored to have entertained more than a few flirtations, most infamously with her uncle Raymond of Poitiers during the Second Crusade. Whether true or not, the whispers are enough to poison her marriage to Louis VII and reshape the entire map of Europe when she ditches him for Henry Plantagenet. In this world, a well-placed love song can topple thrones. Even royal daughters can't escape the fallout. The Tour de Nesle affair of 1314 sees 3 French princesses accused, thanks to a servant's gossip, of adulterous rendezvous in a Parisian tower. The results are spectacularly grim. 2 marriages annulled, alleged lovers flayed and hanged, and the disgraced princesses shipped off to convents for years. The chivalric code praises female virtue, but the justice system is always ready with shackles for anyone who slips up. And then there are the quieter tragedies. Ladies exiled to distant castles for nothing more than exchanging letters. Knights banished to the Crusades to atone for suspected dalliance. Abbots thundering from the pulpit about how a wandering heart is like a rusted sword. The Church never outright bans courtly love, but ecclesiastical courts hand out plenty of fines for excessive familiarity. Apparently, you can sing all you want, as long as you don't actually do anything about it. What all these stories reveal is a tension at the heart of medieval romance, a celebration of forbidden desire, tangled up in a society obsessed with order and punishment. The same crowd that cheers a knight's poetic agony expects him to stop short of real passion. When vows are broken, reputations burn, sometimes literally. The fantasy of noble devotion meets the stone wall of medieval power, and the collision is as messy as you'd expect. Courtly love can inspire poetry, but it can just as easily destroy lives, and every ruined reputation only makes the next forbidden romance more tempting. Nothing stokes desire like the very real threat of ruin. And just as the troubadour's songs set the mood, the next act belongs to the storytellers. If troubadours composed the soundtrack of courtly love, medieval authors provided the big-budget cinematic universe. Get ready to see how these fever dreams of longing and scandal were immortalized in literature, religion, and even in the way we think about love today. You want legacy? Let's talk about the original medieval franchise. The one that made even your most disastrous royal scandals look like an amateur's first tabloid spread. Courtly love wasn't just a passing fad, whispered behind velvet curtains. No, it was the main event, the blockbuster saga that took over the entire cultural stage. If the troubadours were responsible for crafting your nightly playlist of longing and agony, then the writers of the late 12th century were basically your showrunners, directors, and hype men, all rolled into one, building the sort of interconnected universe that modern comic book movies can only dream of. Picture it. Candlelit halls echoing with the latest verse. Every noble trying to outdo the rest with tales of heartbreak and heroics. And at the heart of this cinematic universe, the legendary King Arthur's court, of course. This wasn't just any round table. It was the original reality TV set, a laboratory for every possible romantic disaster you could imagine. Chrétien de Troyes, imagine him as the medieval Spielberg, rolled out Lancelot, the knight of the cart. There you are, watching the flawless Queen Guinevere, her ever-dutiful husband Arthur, and the peerless, terminally lovesick Sir Lancelot. Lancelot does it all. He crosses sword-blade bridges, mows down armies, pulls off stunts that would make even your most ambitious PR team sweat. But his real crucible? Not the battlefield. It's loving a woman he can never declare for, all while trying to keep his chainmail from rusting in the tears of forbidden love. Chrétien didn't just write a story, he wrote the playbook. Secret meetings, coded tokens, the ever-present threat of scandal. He set down all the rules, and readers went absolutely feral. Suddenly, every knight wanted to be Lancelot, except, minus the lifelong adultery migraine, and the constant risk of getting stabbed in the back, literally and metaphorically. Arthurian romance spread faster than a rumor after a bad feast, blazing through Europe. In Germany, Wolfram von Eschenbach gave us Parzival, where spiritual maturity and chaste devotion became the new measure of manhood. In England, poets stitched together epic cycles, culminating in Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur. With that, Arthurian tragedy was basically cemented into the Western canon. Love as glory, love as downfall. You could almost smell the candle wax of 1,000 copyists sighing over their manuscripts. But not every literary romance bothered with plate armor and quests. No, around 1230, Guillaume de Loris started composing the Romance of the Rose, a fever dream where the beloved isn't a person, but a literal rose trapped in a walled garden. Every courtly virtue, humility, courtesy, pity, gets its own human avatar, parading through a landscape of longing and allegory. 4 decades later, Jean de Meun picked up the pen and pumped in a healthy dose of satire, skewering clerics, nobles, and even the love code itself. The poem became a medieval bestseller, copied in hundreds of manuscripts, debated in every university worth its salt. Was it a guide to moral living, or just a dirty joke in fancy dress? The answer, of course, was yes. These stories did more than fill long winter nights. They standardized the language of yearning. Every metaphor, love as service, the beloved as a blazing star, jealousy as a private dungeon, became such a cliché precisely because everyone, from the king to the kitchen boy, pilfered them for their own love letters. Even real-life courts started using these romances as etiquette manuals. How to bow just so, how to flatter with poetic flair, how to pine and despair with the right mix of glamour and self-pity. But here's the twist. Literary romance didn't just sell the dream. It slyly exposed every contradiction. It praised the ideals that troubadours sang about: bravery for love's sake, sacrifice for a glance, while simultaneously winking at their absurdity. Fiction made courtly love seem bigger than life, truer than truth, ensuring that even people who'd never seen a troubadour in the flesh still learned how to sigh and suffer with world-class style. You could say it was the medieval version of TikTok trends. Impossible to ignore, constantly parodied, and always a little ridiculous. Of course, this perfume of courtly love didn't go unnoticed by the people upstairs. As troubadour refrains floated over castle walls, bishops started sniffing out trouble, smelling more brimstone than roses. How could a culture that glorified adulterous longing, emotional obsession, and the artful management of lust possibly coexist with Christian teachings about fidelity, humility, and, well, keeping your hands to yourself? Spoiler alert, it couldn't. Not without a holy tug-of-war. The preachers came in swinging. By the early 13th century, sermon collections like Jacques de Vitry's Exemplar were warning everyone about those knights who rode off for a lady's ribbon at a tournament and came back with a one-way ticket to damnation. Dominicans like Stephen of Bourbon called troubadours, peddlers of vanity, their songs chipping away at both chastity and the fragile social order. Moralists even coined a special term, amour déréglé, or disordered love, to draw a line between proper marital affection and the poetic fever sweeping through court halls. Ecclesiastical courts handed out fines and penances like candy. If you were caught exchanging love tokens during Lent, you might find yourself doing a barefoot pilgrimage, or, worse, paying for church candles. A literal price for playing with metaphorical fire. Confessors didn't let you off the hook either. Manuals for priests advised grilling penitents about secret affairs, suspicious poetry, even excessive daydreaming. Desire itself became a taxable offense, payable in prayers and public humiliation. But the effort to stamp out courtly love was complicated by a little thing called patronage. Many of the era's greatest supporters of love, poetry, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Marie de Champagne, Blanche of Castile, were just as likely to bankroll monasteries as they were to host poetry contests. Bishops could thunder against courtly verse from the pulpit on Sunday and dine with a poetry-loving queen on Tuesday. So, excommunication usually stayed rhetorical, less of a thunderbolt, more of a sternly worded memo. Some clerics tried a little intellectual jiu-jitsu instead of outright bans. Andreas Capellanus's De Amore, allegedly commissioned by Marie de Champagne, laid out 31 rules for love, only to finish with a chapter urging readers to reject the whole system as sinful nonsense. It was the original. Here's how to do it, and here's why you shouldn't. A carnival mirror reflecting the ideals of courtly love so precisely that the whole thing started to look a little ridiculous. Moral commentary disguised as a how-to guide. The satirists, never ones to miss a party, jumped on the bandwagon. The romance of the rose, especially in Jean de Meun's hands, mocked courtly seduction techniques as both entertaining and morally bankrupt. Jealous husbands stalked the pages, nurses peddled tricks, and the heroine's virtue was eventually breached, all with a wink and a grin. The poem became standard reading in universities, proof that a well-aimed joke could wound deeper than any excommunication. Despite the pushback, courtly love survived for one simple reason: it offered emotional drama, the stuff that sermons just couldn't compete with. People don't give up theatre for lectures. The church managed to slow the fever, trim off some excess, but it couldn't kill the desire to desire. By the 14th century, moralists were still complaining, but the DNA of the troubadours had already seeped into Europe's bloodstream. Cupid, now a little more subdued, kept strumming his harp, just more quietly, and with one nervous eye on the pulpit. Fast forward to the mid-14th century, and you'll notice the sparkle of courtly love starting to dim. War, plague, and the rise of new money blurred the neat hierarchies that had once made longing from afar feel so fashionable. Knights started working as mercenaries, troubadours competed with wandering jugglers for scraps of attention, and Europe's mood, ravaged by the Black Death, shifted from silk and sighs to sackcloth and survival. Yet the old language of love didn't vanish. It just slipped into something a little more comfortable: courtesy. Courtesy books, like Baldassare Castiglione's Book of the Courtier in 1528, repackaged all those chivalric poses for Renaissance palaces. Instead of bleeding beneath a lady's window, the ideal courtier now showed sprezzatura, effortless grace in dancing, witty conversation, and the kind of admiration that suggested passion without ever risking a public meltdown. Yearning was still there, but desperation was out. Love was still a game. The rules just swapped out chainmail for velvet and silk. Literature kept pace with these social gymnastics. Geoffrey Chaucer's Troilus and Criseyde, written around 1385, gave us lovers trapped between courtly ideals and the brute force of fate. Troilus worships with textbook devotion, but politics and plague rip the fantasy to shreds. In the Canterbury Tales, Chaucer pokes fun at knights whose grand speeches outstrip their actual ethics, signaling that audiences were now just as interested in parody as in pathos. Thanks to the printing press, everything changed again. Where once only the elite could get their hands on hand, copied romances, cheap chapbooks brought love stories to merchants and artisans. Ballads about the nut-brown maid or Sir Aldingar boiled centuries of chivalric longing into catchy, tragic tunes. Love talk became mass culture, less refined, more democratic, and, let's be honest, a lot more earthy. Meanwhile, politics kept putting a damper on romantic pageantry. In France and Burgundy, courts of love, those mock tribunals where noble women judged amorous disputes, gradually faded as monarchs decided they'd rather have loyal vassals than lovesick poets. Kings preferred oaths of loyalty to oaths of love, but the traditions didn't vanish overnight. Tournaments still handed out ladies' favors. Young nobles still learned to strum a lute for a midnight serenade, and heraldry manuals insisted that a knight might carry a flaming heart on his shield for a maiden's honor. Even the earliest Valentine's Day poetry borrowed its language from medieval codes of secrecy, service, and sweet suffering. So, no, courtly love never really died. It just swapped out its armor for silk and glided into the Renaissance disguised as etiquette. The dream of ennobling desire was simply too intoxicating to abandon. Europe rewrote the script, softened the tragedies, and sold the tropes to every social class. Love remained a ritual. Only the costumes and scenery changed. Even as courtly love faded as a social practice, its DNA kept threading through Western romance like a guilty secret inked on vellum. When the Renaissance traded chainmail for satin, Petrarchan sonneteers just recast the unattainable lady as Laura. Shakespeare, never one to let a trope go stale, turned the whole thing inside out, making Juliet an active partner rather than a passive trophy for her lovesick Romeo. The old ideal of silent suffering became the grand romantic gesture. Balcony speeches, secret letters, roses lobbed at moonlit windows. Medieval rituals, now sporting Elizabethan costumes. The Enlightenment rolled its eyes at chivalric excess, but still prized sensibility. The sweet, slow burn of unspoken longing. Jane Austen's heroines might mock knights and quests, but Darcy's silent devotion to Elizabeth Bennet is pure Lancelot, only with better personal boundaries and mutual respect. The Romantics, never ones for subtlety, turned the pathos up to 11. Byron's "She Walks in Beauty" could have been recited straight to a 12th century duchess. The Victorians, not to be outdone, weaponized courtesy all over again. Calling cards, chaperoned dances, even the elaborate language of flowers, all of it borrowed from medieval symbolism, offering tokens of devotion while keeping up the appearance of restraint. When the industrial city replaced the castle, love still required choreography, and society still judged you by your mastery of coded signals. Cinema picked up the pageant and ran with it. Silent film swashbucklers wooed damsels with swordplay and smoldering stares. Hollywood polished the archetype into tuxedos and ballrooms. Every romantic comedy that makes you wait 90 minutes for a single kiss is just replaying the central premise of courtly love. Anticipation always trumps consummation. Even superhero movies keep the torch burning. Spider-Man, swinging across the skyline just to leave a rose for Mary Jane, he's basically Lancelot in spandex, minus the jousting. And now, in the digital age, the whole ritual comes full circle. Online fandoms idolize celebrities they'll never meet, composing fan fiction, just as troubadours once composed canzos. Emoji hearts and reaction gifs now replace loots and love tokens. But the dynamic is unchanged. An exalted beloved, an admirer pining from afar, and an endless scroll of unfulfilled longing. Shipping wars are just tournaments without the chainmail, though the stakes can feel just as absurdly high. Critics like to call these patterns artificial, even toxic, and sometimes they're right. Courtly love has always balanced on the knife edge of obsession. But the fact that it refuses to die says something important about us. We crave narratives for our desires. We want rules, quests, symbols, and above all, drama. We say we want realistic love, but ticket sales tell a different story. The myth survives because it flatters our emotions and our imaginations. So, as your exhausted royal biographer, I can tell you this. You can change the script, swap the costumes, even trade the castle for a tiny apartment with spotty Wi-Fi. But the show goes on. Somewhere, someone is still penning secret verses, still longing from afar, still performing the rituals of love with impeccable style and just the right amount of self-aware irony. The legacy of courtly love isn't just a chapter in boring history. It's the story we keep telling ourselves over and over because we're still not ready to let the dream die. And honestly, neither are you.